Welcome to the only job where you walk into a room covered in red paint and your first instinct isn't to call a decorator, but to reach for a protractor. If you're here expecting CSI Miami, where we find a single drop of blood, enhance it 4,000 times, and see the killer's reflection in a white-handled spatula, you're in the wrong place. Go back to Netflix. Real life doesn't have a soundtrack, and it definitely doesn't have a lighting budget. It has the smell of old pennies, the hum of a cheap air conditioner, and the crushing realization that you haven't slept since Tuesday. My name is your worst nightmare's mathematician, and I'm a Bloodstain Pattern Analyst. Most people see a slaughterhouse. I see a geometry problem. It's 3:15 a.m. I'm currently standing in a studio apartment in South Philly that looks like a Jackson Pollock painting if Pollock had a grudge and a machete. The air is thick with the metallic scent of hemoglobin and the distinct, lingering aroma of the victim's half-eaten General Tso's chicken. It's the graveyard shift, obviously. My coffee is lukewarm, my back hurts from carrying 40 pounds of forensic gear up 3 flights of stairs, and I'm staring at a wall trying to figure out why the void behind the sofa doesn't match the victim's height. You see, blood doesn't lie. People lie. Killers lie. Even victims lie. But fluid dynamics, physics, those are the only honest things left in this city. Every drop tells a story. A high-velocity mist means a gunshot. A medium-velocity spray suggests a blunt-force object. Think a baseball bat or a very angry hammer. Then you have cast-off, the trail of blood flung from a weapon during the backswing. If I see 3 distinct cast-off trails on the ceiling, I know you didn't just hit him once in self-defense. I know you swung that pipe at least 4 times. My routine is a glamorous cycle of measuring the length and width of thousands of tiny red ovals. We call it stringing the scene. We take strings, tape them to the impact points, and follow the angle back to the source. When all those strings intersect in the middle of the air, that's the area of origin. That's where the life ended. It looks like a giant, morbid spider web, and I'm the spider trying to make sense of the mess. Most of my day or night is spent fighting the urge to tell the lead detective to stop stepping on my evidence. Hey, Detective Johnson, that size 12 boot print you just planted? Yeah, that was a perfect drip pattern that told me the suspect was walking, not running. Now it's just a smudge. Thanks for the help. You need a specific kind of brain for this. You need to be able to compartmentalize the fact that there's a human being lying 3 feet away from you while you calculate the sine of a 30-degree impact angle. If you get emotional, you get it wrong. And if you get it wrong, a murderer walks or an innocent man rots. So you drink your caffeine, you ignore the O'Haras under your eyes that are starting to look like bruises, and you focus on the math. Because in this room, the math is the only thing that makes sense.
So, you think you want my job? You think wearing a white Tyvek suit and looking edgy in photos is the dream? Let me disabuse you of that notion immediately. The path to becoming a Bloodstain Pattern Analyst is paved with trigonometry, chemistry, and enough pig blood to make a butcher uncomfortable. First, let's talk about the stomach check. In the academy, they don't start you with the easy stuff. They want to see if you're going to pass out when the smell of a 3-day-old floater hits your nostrils. If you have a weak constitution, you're out before the first lecture. You need a bachelor's degree in a natural science, physics, biology, chemistry, something that proves you actually understand how the world works. But the real fun starts in the specialized BPA labs. This is where we spend weeks in windowless rooms recreating every possible way a human can leak. We use stabilized pig blood because it has the same viscosity as human blood. We have beating stations where we strike blood-soaked sponges with different objects. We have shooting galleries where we fire rounds into blood-filled targets to study backspatter. You'll spend 8 hours a day analyzing the difference between a satellite spatter and a parent drop. You'll learn that a drop falling at 90 degrees is a perfect circle, but at 10 degrees, it's a long, thin exclamation point with a tail that points exactly in the direction the blood was traveling. We call that the directionality. It's the arrow of death. The failure rate for these advanced certifications is staggering. Why? Because most people are bad at math. To find the angle of impact, you have to divide the width of the stain by its length and then find the inverse sine. Do that 1,000 times in a row without making a mistake while your instructor screams that you're letting a serial killer get away. Then comes the void test. A void is where blood should be, but isn't, because something was in the way. Maybe it was the killer's arm, maybe it was a weapon. Identifying a void is like looking for a ghost. It's the absence of evidence that becomes the evidence. You also have to study transfer patterns. That's when a bloody object touches a non-bloody surface, like a bloody handprint on a doorknob. But it's never as clear as the movies. It's usually a partial, distorted smear that you have to somehow prove matches the suspect's work gloves. We spend months learning about swipe versus wipe. A swipe is a bloody object moving across a surface. A wipe is a clean object moving through existing blood. Distinguishing between them tells us the sequence of events. Did the killer move the body before or after the blood started to clot? That's the difference between premeditated murder and a crime of passion. You'll also spend a ridiculous amount of time studying expirated blood. That's blood blown out of the nose or mouth. It looks a lot like high-velocity gunshot spatter, but it has tiny air bubbles and mucus. If you mistake lung blood for a gunshot wound, the whole investigation goes sideways. The training is a mental marathon of sleep deprivation and gore. By the time you get your certification, you've seen enough simulated trauma to fill a decade of therapy. But you don't go to therapy. You go to the diner, order the greasiest burger they have, and try not to think about the viscosity of the ketchup.
Let's get into the guts of it, a real case. This is what we call the mission. About 6 months ago, I got called to a suburban home in a nice neighborhood. You know the type. Manicured lawns, 2 cars in the driveway, and a husband crying his eyes out on the porch. He claimed he came home and found his wife at the bottom of the stairs. Said she must have tripped, hit her head, and bled out. Accidents happen, right? The responding officers were ready to call it a tragic fall, but then I walked in. The hallway was a mess, but bloodstains aren't just a mess, they're a map. I started at the bottom of the stairs. There was a large drip pattern near the body, passive drops, perfectly circular. That means she was stationary and upright while bleeding for a while. That doesn't happen in a fall. When you fall downstairs, your blood travels with you. It creates impact spatter along the trajectory. I looked at the walls. Halfway up the stairs, there were cast-off stains, long, linear trails of droplets. Remember what I said about the backswing? You don't get cast off from falling. You get cast off from swinging a heavy object. The husband was standing behind me, still sobbing. I ignored him and pulled out the strings. I started mapping the area of origin for the cast-off on the ceiling. The strings didn't point to the stairs. They pointed to a spot in the middle of the hallway, about 5 feet off the ground. The math was screaming at me. This wasn't an accident. This was a beatdown. Then I found the void. On the wall opposite the stairs, there was a massive spray of medium-velocity spatter, but in the center of it, there was a clean, white silhouette of a person's shoulder and head, a ghost in the blood. The killer had been standing right there when the fatal blow was delivered. He blocked the spray. I looked at the husband's distraught face. He was wearing a clean shirt, but his shoes, his expensive leather loafers, had tiny, microscopic forward spatter on the laces. You only get that if you're within 2 feet of the impact. The final nail in the coffin was the skeletonized stains. When a drop of blood starts to dry, the edges dry first, forming a ring. If you wipe the blood away after a minute, the ring remains. I found skeletonized rings on the floor that had been wiped over with a wet towel. He tried to clean up. He waited for the blood to dry slightly, panicked, wiped it, and then realized he couldn't hide it all, so he staged the fall. I spent 12 hours in that house. By the time I was done, I had 450 data points and a geometric reconstruction that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the trip and fall was actually a 3-minute struggle involving a fireplace poker. I didn't say a word to the husband. I just packed my protractor, my strings, and my evidence bags. I walked past the detectives and said, "The math says he's a liar. Check his shoes and the fireplace." 3 weeks later, they found the poker buried in the backyard. The blood and the crevices matched the wife. He's now serving life without parole. People ask me how I sleep at night after seeing things like that. The truth? I sleep fine, because I know that while everyone else was looking at the tragedy, I was looking at the truth. I'm the blood spatter analyst. I read the drops so the dead can finally speak. Now, get me another coffee. I have another Jackson Pollock waiting for me across town, and I'm pretty sure this one involves a chainsaw.